My early days were London-based, and my focus then was very much design and publishing, and I had a very long, and some say successful, career in the media and publishing industry. And actually then I came to Scotland around about 17 or 18 years ago, and I sort of transcended into that area as well, and I got very involved in what I call the digital and telecommunication revolution. Over those years, I was quite used to a very combative environment. I moved up quite quickly because I had a very clear focus about what I wanted to do and where I wanted to be, and I think I played a very important role in my personality. I was very ego-driven. Some say actually I was probably quite arrogant in the way I went about my business, but in fact I was, in traditional terms at least, successful. And a few years later, while working within the corporate environment, I started to rethink, and those thought processes really were focused on some of the downsides to the business world and the corporate environment that I was seeing. I measured my well-being on how the job was going. And of course that meant that anything that changed for the good, or perhaps perceived as a negative, that affected me personally. And I started to see that this was actually this is how things affected people in the organization. And it was promoted because that type of allegiance and loyalty to targets and goals and infrastructure is very strongly promoted within large organizations. And of course those processes that are built around that support that. So therefore, when change happens, when business change drives through an organization, or the executive want to make changes, those emotional attachments to the processes and activities are so strong that again that creates fear and more stress. And I began to question some of that. Now it was a long process, but what I did many years later, and I think also my family had some part in that, because they could see how I was, how should we say, blind to a sense of a part of my life, which I suppose some people call that the sort of natural or spiritual side. And I started to become a student of Eckhart Tolle. And I read Eckhart Tolle avidly, and I still do. And he completely changed my whole thought process. And I suddenly started understanding a little bit about what are the drivers for the things that I've been seeing in my professional life. I formed also another individual program more recently called Mindful Man, and in that process the idea really was to allow men to come together to learn mindfulness in a very safe and positive environment. And the reason that Mindful Man was formed was the predominance of what I call the male ego within corporate and business processes, and also the fear that a lot of men have to open up in an emotional sense, which is a lot easier, we find, for women. So of course the average mindfulness or meditation course, you might see perhaps 2 or 3 men to every 20 women, and so we're trying to readdress the balance. And it was during that program, setting up that program and talking to a lot of people who are going to be part of that program, that I drew a parallel to a certain extent with ULAB. And that's really the following. ULAB, I suppose, for me, is divided into 3 main elements. There's the individual, there's the group or cooperative group, which we could call company or organization, you know. And of course then there is the thing that supports all of that, which is the environment itself. That is, let's call it nature, for want of a better term. In order for us to be able to prioritize the well-being of all life, that is the well-being of the individual, their happiness and their ability to actually achieve their own goals, the ability to be able to provide that opportunity within a working group environment, and in turn to do that in line with what we are, which is nature itself, and therefore to be mindful of the environment and our impact on it. In other words, to do this together, jointly. One needs to start with the individual. If the individual is still focusing on the I, if the individual is still focusing on fear of letting go what they have or what went before, all of those unconscious thoughts and drivers that we have, then the likelihood is the collective result of that will not offer real change and real understanding that the things that we think are very important in our lives and our business, as much as it's difficult to actually sometimes get to grips with, is in fact all conceptual. The truth is that companies, brands, money, everything that we hold to be fundamentally important, that drives us literally 12 hours, 8 hours a day, are all not real. They are imaginary concepts. The only thing that is really real are things that we produce or we make, but more importantly, the environment, trees, nature, the air that we breathe. And the human race has got to a point now where all of the technological change, all of the processes and organizations that we've actually created have all had massive changes to, or driven massive changes to the way that we actually go about our lives. But the question ultimately is are we actually any happier? What are the processes and mechanisms that we've put in place to ensure that actually we and the world around us is both happy and conducive to natural growth? And unfortunately, that is not the case. So when ULAB wants to start to look at these three building blocks, individual, groups and organizations, processes to governments, and their place in the world, the natural world, that objectivity that is needed is one of a child. It's now to be open. We now need to be open. We now need to be, if you like, prepared to actually completely change and see things in a very, very different way. Somebody said to me recently about, I thought it was a rather lovely thing. They said, a seed, to express its true potential, its true purpose, has to break the outside. It has to turn itself inside out and completely demolish itself for that growth to come. And from the outside looking in, that's total and absolute destruction. That's what it looks like, but it's not. It's change. And that's where the growth comes. And what I think ULAB is doing, and what interests me most, is that it's actually offering an opportunity for people to open-heartedly change. What is it we are here to do? Are we here to do things more quickly? Are we here to do things more economically? Are we here to make more money? What is the purpose of our existence in relation to everything around us? And the sole purpose must be the individual well-being of the human race and indeed the natural environment around it. That is the only sustainable answer. So ULAB is all about making those changes in our world, perhaps in small steps. And therefore, for me, my work is working predominantly with individuals, and it's from the individual that it will actually grow. So the starting point is ourselves. Let's look at ourselves. Let's become aware of those attachments and allegiances that we have that actually we need to break free of. And when we do that, we have a real opportunity to drive change.